So this is my round 8 game from the Australian Championships. I'm playing against CM Daniel Melamed, who I was actually staying with for this tournament with another guy. And so obviously there's a bit of tension, right, when you're playing someone you're staying with, like you're preparing and they're in the same room, right? And also I was making fun of him a lot for playing the London system, which is his main opening with the white pieces. And he sort of got fed up with that, and for this game decided to play 1e4. And I thought a little bit whether I should play the Caro-Kann against this, which is my main opening against 1e4. Because I know some other stuff like d6, for example, and the Finlador. But okay, I just decided to stick with c6 and go for the Caro-Kann because, you know, this is what I know best. I believe in my repertoire, and, you know, he's not actually really, he might be, I'm not sure, but, like, he doesn't really have as much experience in these openings as I do, so even if he comes up with something, I believe that like I'll be able to play the middle game better, at least in theory. So okay, we have this. He goes to the exchange variation, and the exchange variation is always a solid way to play without like a whole lot of theory, but you're sort of aiming for a slight advantage. I go for queen c7. I've always liked this line instead of the knight f6 main line. Like, this is playable, but everyone knows this, and it leads to a position which, at least in my opinion, can be a little bit difficult to win sometimes. So, okay, after c3, I go queen c7, and basically the idea is just to stop bishop f4 again. And, you know, there's like the old main line where white will play knight e2 and try to force through bishop f4, but it comes at the cost of the knight being a bit more passive on the square. If you go knight f3, then bishop g4 is an annoying pin. It's also why in this position, right, that you go c3 and you delay the development of this knight, so as to avoid like this pin. And okay, after queen c7, I'd say the modern main line is h3, preparing knight f3 without the pin, right? But okay, what we see in the game is a bit different. We have knight a3, and this is an interesting move which I actually faced in the 2018 Australian Championships 6 years ago. And I don't really remember much from the game other than it was a draw and I had a good position. But funnily enough, when we were talking afterwards, Daniel was saying he didn't even see my game in the database where knight a3 was played, which was interesting. But okay, it's like, you know, it's an interesting move. It's not gonna like refute my Caro-Kann or anything, but it is definitely going to just lead to a interesting position. So you know, I have to be a little bit careful. I don't think I really want to go knight f6 is after knight b5 and like queen b8. I probably have to be a little bit careful. I'm not going to like run into trouble with these sort of cheap tricks. So the usual way to play is just to go a6, stop any of these knight b5 shenanigans, go knight c2, and now I play e6 in the game. And generally speaking, the Caro-Kann, you don't really want to shut in your light squared bishop without a good reason, but it's an interesting idea in a lot of these Caro-Kann positions to actually just shut in your bishop anyway, and basically go for this setup where you're going to go for e6, bishop d6, put the knight on e7. I think that's somewhat important, and then play for this f6 e5 plan. And definitely you could play something like knight f6 as well and keep this option developing the bishop open, but after h3, probably you're gonna, if you want to really develop this bishop, you're gonna go g6 probably, and for something like bishop f5 and try to get sort of this structure on the board. And white doesn't have to comply. They can go like bishop e2 if they want. They can castle, keep the tension. But okay, this is like one way you could plausibly play. You could also go for e6 here as well. But and while you could argue that, you know, white spent a tempo on h3, so it's a sort of a small victory, personally I'd rather have the knight on e7 and be able to go for this f6 e5 plan. I can't really do that when the knight's on f6, but okay, all these moves are playable. I just decided to go for this. So, and I was sort of expecting something like this, natural development, but okay, instead we have a bit of a surprise, queen f3, and he played this very quickly as well, but I think this was sort of a bluff. I don't really think this is that amazing, because okay, it is a very ambitious setup, and if it works out, you can play knight e2, bishop f4, like maybe trade bishops if a bishop ever pops onto d6, and it kind of worked in the game because I didn't fully trust my instincts and I didn't really try to punish it. But okay, we have bishop d6, knight e2, and I end up playing knight e7, after which I think white got a little bit of an edge with trading his bishops, and like we got to this queenless middle game position where he offered a draw and I didn't accept it. But stepping back a little bit, what I thought, at least what I was thinking during the game, was okay, I see bishop f4 is coming. Ideally, I'd like to go something like f6 maybe and just slam this, sorry, let's say bishop f4 e5 and be able to do this. I thought that if I could like get this on the board, that'd be doing pretty well. But I wasn't so sure about, instead, let's say like knight f4, you know, now white's creating this threat of queen h5, and I thought, like, okay, I can go queen f7 to stop that, and maybe try and go knight e7, e5 next, but I was worrying about, like, c4, and I thought that white sort of gaining initiative here. The engine says it's okay, but during the game, I mean, I wasn't so sure. I felt like I was maybe violating some opening principles, and I was just wasting a bit too much time, and it would not be too surprising if I, in fact, was getting punished by moves like this. I was also considering something like e5, since, you know, if I can get this fork in, that might sort of be nice. It's not exactly an obvious square the queen can go to. And also, if they instead take on, like, d5 here, I was a little bit hung up on this sort of stuff, where I see that I probably have compensation, but I wasn't really fully convinced by it. The engine shows that this is actually really good, though, for black, maybe like a bit better even, and that, you know, because white is just so behind development, black has really promising chances. But during the game, I just didn't quite trust myself here. I had a feeling maybe he'd looked at this because he was still playing so quickly, but okay, like, should have probably trust my instincts a bit more here. So I just went for this. I didn't really want to risk stuff too much, and I knew, like, okay, I'd have a playable position, maybe chance to outplay. But the reality is, after the dark sword bishops got traded off, I lost a lot of dynamic potential in my position, and this position was very hard to play for a win. Also, I'll say that if I go e5, I wasn't too thrilled with this, because, like, I can't even really move my e-pawn because of the pin, and I felt that this queen would be maybe a tad bit annoying over here, and yeah, I just wasn't too thrilled with e5. I thought it was just easiest to exchange this, go h6, and I thought there was maybe some potential to sort of outplay even in this position. Because, like, okay, the queens are traded off, but there's still a lot of pieces, there's some potential pawn breaks. But the deeper we got into this, the more I'm, like, a little bit unsure. Because the thing is, right, is when the queens are off the board, when queens are on the board, let's say, like, e5 has a lot of potential because you can attack them and stuff, but when they're traded off, e5 and they take and take, these central pawns can actually be more of a weakness than, like, something we can exploit from an attacking point of view, let's say. So after knight f4, and maybe there was even better stuff, like I think the computers want to go f3, like king f2, and just play like slow moves, sort of wait for black to do something. But after knight f4, this was really probably one of the first moments in the game I was really thinking a bit, and I ended up going for g5. And in hindsight, I don't think this is so great. During the game, I was sort of a little bit pissed off that Daniel offered the draw, to be honest. Like, because I just felt it was way too early to offer a draw. And maybe it was somewhat of a tactic to try and, like, provoke me to do stuff like g5, who knows. But yeah, I sort of, like, it's double-edged because it could potentially, like, lead to me expanding and gaining a bit of space and making some progress, but it could also, because queens are traded off, and this is maybe you could say an endgame, just leading to a lot of weaknesses. And I think the best choice was just go knight e2, go backwards, and just sort of play this position. The computer's top choice is f4, and okay, that's a playable option. You could also play more conservatively with something like f3 maybe, but okay, like, definitely I probably should have just played a bit more calmly, like bishop d7 maybe. I think the computer was saying even like b5 is the best move. I was very hesitant to play b5, even though I want to go for the minority attack in some sort of capacity. I understood that, like, I'm weakening the c5 square a lot, and when I don't have the dark sword bishop on the board, it's very easy to imagine the knight popping in there and being kind of a pain in the ass. But nonetheless, the engine still said this was the best move. But okay, from a practical point of view, it's not so easy to play that. I played g5, and what ended up happening was knight h5. And this, I felt like there was some hope, because at the very least now we can get this sort of position where the knight is a little bit stranded on the edge of the board. And I didn't know what the evaluation was, but I felt like maybe I'm okay. At the very least, it's definitely interesting. And Daniel ended up going g4, which meant that after f4, again, the knight sort of doesn't have a clear path out. And if you go on like f4, well, then g4, and still you don't have any easy things to do with the knight. But okay, what ends up happening is g4, and basically after f4 and this stuff, king d2, I sort of contradicted the whole plan I was going for, because I ended up taking on h5. When I was just saying, right, that I want to keep the knight there basically trapped for all eternity, but then I sort of felt like it's not really realistic to expect to keep that knight trapped on h5. It's just not going to happen, because what's eventually going to happen is white's going to play g3. And okay, if I take, the knight gets out, and life goes on. If they play this and they take here, I take back. Again, the knight still doesn't really have any squares, but eventually what's going to happen is white's going to play g5. I'm going to take, they're probably going to bring a rook to the g file, and if they can like take here and stuff, well then the knight's definitely gonna like get out somewhere. It's gonna like be involved in this sort of dangerous counter attack. So I realized it is not plausible for me to just sit here and expect the knight to be trapped there and me just play like a piece up. That's not gonna happen. So I end up taking the knight on h5 very counterintuitively. It wasn't the best move either, but yeah, my brain was sort of in a spiral this game. I didn't really know what was going on. Probably it was just best to go bishop g6, which makes sense. You want to trade off the knights with bishops, and basically just play this position. And okay, at this point you admit you're not going to keep the knight trapped, and you just try and like hold down the fort like this. Black is probably doing okay, maybe like a tad a bit worse, but nothing unmanageable, right? You also have play of your own, like you can bring the knight in here. So I think after king d2, definitely a bit impulsive to take, but it did highlight my understanding of the position, you could say, in some sense, which was that, you know, I'm not going to realistically be able to keep the knight trapped there. So I thought I'd just exchange that off and then try to hold this position solely like so. And okay, we have the following moves, and I'd say around this point, I'm still like probably doing within the realms of like, okay, maybe white could have played a few better moves. I wasn't sure that they had to really start pushing these pawns forward so quickly. I thought maybe they could like double up on the e file first and then like wait to do something on the queen side. I didn't think there was a need to commit there so quickly. I feel like you should just improve your pieces first. But okay, this is what happens. Knight c8. I want to improve my knight to a better square. b4. And again, I probably should have just went knight d6. And I mean, it looks very normal, but I was very overreacting to this sort of positional idea of going a5, fixing the b pawn, and then going knight a1 to b3, and then c5. But in reality, it's not so simple to do that, because black also has the ability to make moves, believe it or not, and we can go like rook e8, and if they still insist on knight a1, we can go e5 and get counterplay, right? So definitely I was overreacting. I played a5, which I thought during the game, like this whole thing where they get b5 in and stuff would just create squares for my pieces, wouldn't be so good. But when you look at it dynamically, and the fact that they're going to get in c4 and my pieces are actually all pretty awkward if you look at it from a concrete point of view, those static factors don't really matter as much, and c4 was played immediately in the game. I think it was even stronger to go knight f3 and then c4, but this is what happened, and like, okay, I have some weaknesses, it's not so easy to really develop this knight. I think it was a bit better to put this knight here so that if c4, I'm ready to like take and maybe put a knight on d5, for example. But yeah, I think in general in this game, I think he was just very shallow, and I was a bit lucky that my opponent Daniel didn't play this like super accurately. Like, I think at this point, king d3, this sort of allowed knight d5. And then we exchanged some stuff, and after rook f7, a very important move, switching around to the c file, we just agreed on a draw after rook e8. Reason being that if I play rook c7, king d2, if I go rook c3 and try to infiltrate, I thought at first, like when I played rook f7, I'm actually maybe even taking over. Because again, this rook, I think you really should have brought it back into the game earlier on. But the problem is at this point, you can't play rook c3, because white's going to take this, and now if you take, you just are down a piece. So then that's going to, like, I don't know, like compel me to do something like, sorry, after king d2, maybe like knight f7 or something, trade like a pair of rooks, and like it will probably be relatively equal. And definitely there is something to be said about trying to maybe press a little bit more here, for example, going like after like king d2 here, trying to like play this out a little bit. Sorry, it was... yes, knight f7. Let's say they bring the rook back into play because it's not really doing much on h5 anymore. Knight d6, and like, okay, they can play like rook e1 maybe, and I think that this position is pretty difficult to win. If I go knight c4, for example, I can like try and go for something like this, and maybe I could have extended the game a little bit more, but ultimately I don't really believe in this. And also I should mention, I was down quite a bit of time on the clock as well when we agreed to a draw. In this position, I think I had less than 20 minutes and Daniel had like 50 minutes or something absurd on the clock. So really didn't feel any need to play this out any further. And also here, this was the thing. So like king d3, it's a very subtle like mistake, but basically like I think it all comes down to at many points, white really should have just like activated this rook somehow, whether that starts with bringing this back immediately or going rook e5. You need to do something, right? And something like this, for example, makes it a lot more difficult for me to play knight d5 because the square is being covered. And in a lot of positions, the king was actually sort of vulnerable to a check from d3. Like, for example, the c3 square could be used like when the knight combines with the rook, or like I double up here. You're avoiding all of that stuff when the king's on d2 actually, so I think that also somewhat helps. But yeah, I mean, not too much else to say about this game. Not a very high quality one, to be honest, from maybe either side. Maybe more so from mine. I think I made a few more inaccuracies, but yeah, not super eventful. I don't think my opponent was really trying to, no offense to Daniel, but I don't think he was really trying to win this game too hard either. So sometimes when you're black and your opponent is, 100 points more rated than you, if they genuinely do not want to win, it can be difficult to do much about that sometimes. And definitely I don't want to make too many excuses. I didn't play this perfectly, so taking again a bird's eye view of the events of this round, Rishi copped a draw actually in his game against Trevor Tao, so still in first place on 7, but a point behind him, it's Red Litchfield on now 6 out of 8 rather, after he beat Kian Lee, and basically, yeah, okay, my game ended in a draw, and basically after scoring 0.5 out of 2 in the last few rounds, there's a lot of people who've caught up to the same score I am, because you see all these people on 4 points. Quite a few won, so they're on 5 now. Melamed's also on 5. Trevor Tao also on 5. So a lot of people converging on the same score at this point in the tournament. A lot of tension. But okay, definitely clear ahead of the pack is still Rishi. And for the next round, actually, again, I was paired down. I was playing against WIM Hong An Yun, who scored an upset against Julia Ryanova. But okay, we're going to cover that in the next video. Hopefully this was instructive, and yeah, see you guys until next time.